Harris packed the rest of her things alone, with Doris standing guard in the doorway. Back in her room, Jo put on a dress and combed her hair until she looked respectable. She had decided to speak to their mother. It was terrifying. It had been 10 years at least since she'd seen her mother's room, and almost a year since she'd seen her mother coming into the nursery to try to smile at the toddling Violet. But these were desperate times. This couldn't be. The older sisters couldn't replace the nannies as overseers for the younger ones. It wasn't fair to force them into this captivity forever. Surely even their mother, who saw so little, could see that. But when Jo had summoned the courage to go down the front stairs to the second floor and knock on their mother's door, the frothy white bed was made up, and the inlaid oak wardrobes were empty. That was how Jo found out their mother had, at last, given up on producing a son for the Hamilton patriarch. Jo let herself cry for 2 minutes to mourn a mother she'd hardly known, who could do no good for her daughters ever again. Then she set it aside. She set everything aside. There was some hollow place inside her that grew and grew. Jo called Lou and Ella and told them, so they would have the crying over with. Ella was tender-hearted enough to weep for their mother and not for herself. Lou dashed tears from her eyes as if ridding herself of a bad habit. "We could tell them she ran away," suggested Ella after the first flood. Jo said, "I don't want to give them impossible ideas." Lou said, "Then divide them. Let's get it over with." Jo spoke to Hattie and Mattie, and stoic Rebecca. Araminta and Doris fell to Lou. Araminta took it badly, mostly because it came from Lou, and Jo wished later that she'd known enough to give her to Ella instead. Ella went into the nursery and gathered Sophie into her lap and dried her tears with a threadbare cuff. Only after Sophie was sleeping did she do the same for the little twins, Rose and Lily, who had started asking when their mother would visit. Violet was too young to understand. She'd never ask, assuming her mother must have been Ella. Rebecca would eventually set her straight, but so late an intercession of the facts had no effect on what Violet really thought. When the cook delivered dinner, she mentioned their father had asked what all the noise was about. "We can't go out anymore," Jo told Lou when the lights were out. "If he catches us now, there'll be no mercy. We're to stay inside with the others." That was when Lou cried. That Christmas, as a reward for good behavior, their father had parcels delivered. It was a generous year from their father. Sewing kits and books, dolls and music boxes. The dolls were discarded. Araminta picked up the sewing kit. Jo picked up the books. Each room, they occupied 6, received a music box. The melody was the same, not even right for dancing. The party dresses, cruel, Jo thought, were the wrong sizes for anyone but Rebecca and Ella, and too long. But they looked almost like they should, and everyone declared it a good Christmas. With her savings, planning for disaster that might never come, Jo ordered a handful of flimsy coats. Ella had chipped in enough to buy hair ribbons. The ribbons went over better. She handed them to 6 girls, 1 for each room. No one said they were cheap or ugly, though they were. Anything that had to do with outside carried power. They cast glances out the window. "Never wear them unless you have to," Jo said, and they all nodded without asking why. By then, their father was a myth. Jo was the one you worried about. Ella was the first to ask Araminta if she could do something with the length. Soon Ella's coat had a mostly even ruffle at the collar, made from leftover hem. The others lined up, and Araminta, barely old enough to thread a needle by herself, did what she could. In their rooms, they'd slip them on, grinning as if at the beginning of a great adventure.